trying to get you folks to understand this is how the smoke and mirrors works. I just simply want to find out what happened to the American dream as someone who is living the American nightmare. You got to know the facts, and if we came together, we could overcome the corruption that's murdering us all.
I'm just trying to make the world aware of the truth, and I've got it.
It's an insane world. Things are coming at me fast and furious, as always. And it's really amazing to be in this situation where, for example, take this morning. I was on phone conversations with some of the most important people that exist, that have access to tens of millions of viewers. And I'm working on putting together the elements of what will ultimately become a very loud and piercing sort of punch through the incredible, cloudy, murky insanity of everything that's taking shape in our world and in our media. Now, the old timers might say, well, welcome to life, because everything has always been crazy and always will. The only reason that maybe it feels like things are spinning out of control is because we just have more ways to communicate faster and mostly in misinformation. It's insane. All of the elements that are kind of shape-shifting our understanding of how things work and how we can choose to go find the voices and the answers that align mostly with what it is that we think and approach and how we want to live and let live and all of those other types of things. I mean, extremes might be, for example, the far right. There might be a movement underway that is maybe a 2022 version of fascist movements that came before. And to what outcome? What, a modern day slavery that doesn't already exist? And meanwhile, it's always that age-old adage of like the frog in the boiling water. It feels comfortable at first until it boils and then you're dead. And a lot of people who are like in the Christmas holiday celebratory sort of mindset, minus like battling the traffic and everything that comes with finding presents and putting them on your credit cards, and maybe the uncertainty that maybe you're spending too much because you don't know if you're going to have a job in the new year and all of those types of things, or maybe you were already laid off and you're in a really, really unfortunate space and you're asking yourself, well, how did this happen? I'm kind of reminded of the same lyrics that came out of that unbelievable, almost prophetic song by David Byrne and the Talking Heads, Once in a Lifetime. Well, how did I get here? We got here through this mosaic that's on display almost every moment of every day within the context of let's start with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, and ultimately what's being revealed in the John Ray hearings in Congress that have all of these tentacles within regulation and political donations and technology and people's mindset and why people might invest in crypto or Bitcoin or why and how and all of those sorts of elements that are all part of that sort of package. But meanwhile, for a kind of an alternative look at the world, if you were to use Twitter as kind of a data point, it ultimately is this scenario where everybody that could come out of the woodwork that has a right-wing sort of, ideology is packing so much into this sort of culture war that has been there, but that is just now moving into a different direction, faster and more sort of cohesive. Let's check off the boxes of what seems to be rattling the right on Twitter. Well, first, everybody's favorite pedophilia or sex trafficking, and who in power is covering it up for what reason. It's incredibly interesting to me that this frenzy, it's almost this, are you kidding me? There's the bad guys out there that are raping our children and they're part of power and they're sucking the blood out of them. And oh, by the way, if you're Matt Taibbi and Elon Musk, yeah, the FBI has been hiding elements that kind of fit into that scenario when they should be doing the job of anti-terrorism and other major crimes, such as the crime that I'm revealing to you, which incidentally, we discovered that the FBI actually had done its job leading up to what it is that I continue to reveal to you, only to be stymied by its own political party and ultimately, ironically, and this has got to be like an age-old sort of thing that happens in this sort of culture where during this time period that I'm referring to, the resources that were used to go and basically circle the noose around this massive, massive nationwide white collar crime spree, they took resources away from that and put it into going after finding out about pornography. Yeah, that only happened about 10 years ago, by the way. And so, yeah, it's interesting that Matt Taibbi and Elon Musk and this echo chamber are like, oh my God, look at the FBI and porn and covering for, sexual exploits and deviation and all this stuff, which is this thing that people get freaking hyper like, oh my God, are you kidding me? It's the new blood libel. And then ultimately, that's infused with what? Immigration. That's infused with the cacophony of calling for Anthony Fauci's head because the plandemics, presumably, was this thing of the state to what? Like kill everybody, to basically get everybody on their heels so that things could happen. Look, I'm not an expert, and I've said this before, in all things crypto, I was about to say crypto, in all things COVID, but, I know what happened in finance and monetary policy throughout this time period, which is definitely interesting. And is there a correlation? I could not go there in a million years because I don't have that access, and that's not where I've been in terms of actual, dissemination and work and the gumshoe sort of commitment that is involved with getting all of the right information together factually to present a narrative that understands how this whole thing works, which presumably is the whole function of the FBI. But I can tell you that it's not I'm trying to think of the term that when you go into an institution and you're there for life, basically, that's different than political appointees that could actually be at the apex of said agencies. So like all the professionals in the system know exactly what's going on and what should be done, but they can literally have the rug pulled out from them and they take a faceplant, which I've learned is a terminology in crypto, by the way, and Bitcoin, justifiably so, which brings us full circle to what it is that I'm trying to reveal to you. So Matt Taibbi and the right are, I can't believe I even said that, Matt Taibbi and the right, whatever that means. I mean, Matt Taibbi, a journalist who's actually one of the greatest journalists of our times, has chosen to go with what is the hot hand because he can with Elon, and he's getting 90,000 to 100,000 views and likes on every tweet, which changes the paradigm of information. I mean, it's real information, but they've chosen to pick this information that this audience wants to hear. Famously, it's called Give the People What They Want. There's a great Kink song from that, like back in the, I guess, early 80s that I used to love to listen to. But that's what it is. It's like Wag the Dog. It's like, it's trolling for, it's chum for all of these people. And I look at like Marjorie Taylor Greene and, Jim Jordan and all of these like right wingers that are in Congress that pop up on these Twitter feeds and they amplify these conspiracy theories among what I just mentioned, not to mention insurrection and all the insanity that we saw with Donald Trump the other day. Oh my God, the $99 playing cards. I felt like I was in the midst of like, something along the lines of South Park meets The Simpsons. I mean, it was like so over the top. What was it? The Trey Parker and his partner, why can't I think of their names? The America, fuck yeah. This is all straight out of that book. In fact, I'm not sure if, quite frankly, because I think Matt Taibbi has a great sense of humor and it comes from my sort of era, like where we could probably talk about 15 different quotes from Caddyshack, for example, right? Or some of the great movies from the 80s. He has that type of humor, and I think maybe Elon does too, and there's like this Monty Python sort of vibe where it's like, are they punking everybody because of the whole cancel culture situation? I'm not quite sure. But meanwhile, there's this, incredible frenzy on the right, and it probably is a data point, and everybody, that are probably on the left or some version that's not the right or fascism, or like, let's go to Mastodon or let's go to our club so we don't have to like deal with this. Meanwhile, my attitude is that I want to engage, and mix it up with everybody, because I'm trying to get everybody to understand everybody's getting played. It doesn't matter what your ideology is, except for the fact that all of the there's sort of carnival barkers, those are at the apex, that are kind of like these tools in the fool circus, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, whether she knows it or not. They're there for a purpose, to rile people up for specific outcomes. Meanwhile, they have no idea how the system works. But the same could be said for AOC. Honestly, I don't put them in the same category. I'm not saying, look, left AOC is like the same version of Marjorie Taylor Greene, not even close. But at the same time, their ignorance of the system is. And so, for example, Matt Taibbi and Elon Musk are all over the FBI this morning. And like I mentioned previously, in our work, we discovered that the FBI had pulled the noose on the largest criminal conspiracy in the United States, and they had it dead to rights. But as it turns out, like I said previously, that the hierarchy, the political hierarchy, ultimately chose to take resources away from this, because as it turns out, one of the largest contributors to this particular presidency was somebody who was at the apex of the con that the FBI was about to frickin' bring down the hammer on. And what happened was, they basically, the AG at the time, the AG at the DOJ had said, no, we're going after porn. That's how political machinations work. It's how asymmetric information works. The guys up top can puppeteer everybody else. And that's ultimately what's been going on. And that's the system I'm trying to reveal to you. Because if you look at FTX, if you look at what was the ones that I learned about last night, and I've been going through this in a big way because of some new projects that I'm dealing with, that involves some people that could get to tens of millions of people. And if I brought their name up, they'd be like, you're not talking to them. And I'd be like, yeah, I am. But the bottom line is that, FTX and Bitfinex, I think is how you pronounce it. And of course, Tether, all of these guys maturated their con based on asymmetry, a mere revolution of what they considered, what I know to be the reason why Bitcoin and blockchain and crypto supposedly came to be, which was to DeFi, because of the nature of fiat. But they all then decided to become fiat because maybe that was the point all along. All I can tell you is, if you look at crypto, if you look at FTX, if you look at Alameda, if you look at Tether, if you look at Bitfinex, and many, many, many others, Luna, from what I understand as well, and I'm just learning some about this, but it's always been predicated on the same premise the whole time. Now, there's gaming people that are into blockchain that want to mine, and there's value, and then there's the trading, and then there's, how all of the different games maturate, right? And then there's a bunch of pump and dump schemes, and there's a bunch of shadow players, and everybody knows it's the Wild West, and yet now we're talking about regulation. Meanwhile, the SEC was digging into it, but then the SEC's like, no, caveat emptor. I mean, we're not going to, integrate you, except maybe there's some technology there for what's going to happen with centralized digital currency downstream. I mean, it's a complicated game that we're all basically dancing to, like marionettes. But at the core of it all is what I continue to profess and tell you over and over and over. And so, like, for example, in the mainstream media, I mean, there's almost all these scoffs. Like, it's like you look at FTX and it was like, John Ray in Congress the other day was getting all of these questions by all of these different representatives on all of these different committees. And they're just like, why did this happen? How did it happen? Who was supposed to look? Meanwhile, they were the ones who were supposed to make sure it didn't happen. But it's not really regulated because it was, in a domiciled and offshored in the Bahamas and blah, blah, blah. So there's just hypocrisy, not to mention the donations and all the rest of it. And everybody gets on their platitudes, as opposed to what we should do is have prosecutors going directly at what the crimes are that they knew, because there was 8, felony charges by the DOJ, which moved at lightning speed to arrest Sam Bankman-Fried last week. But again, what's the point of everything? So everybody in crypto, everybody in Bitcoin, everybody in these exchanges, they fancied themselves what? Can you answer the question based on everything that I've laid out for you? They fancy themselves fiat. They fancy themselves the Federal Reserve. They fancy themselves a country, but they're not a country. So that's a problem. Yes, is there blockchain that could be used in a lot of very powerful ways? So, like, for example, in our journey, we went to the ends of the earth and back to discover, among other things, that in a direct comparison to how this whole thing works in crypto, is that For example, in the housing collapse, what the system does is it hyperinflates the asset value to be able to create collateral for loans that then went into the derivatives, but that everything was cross-pollinated immediately because it was like roulette on the revenue stream that created what the housing revenue could generate, and then however many other bets and bets on bets, and then there's even more bets on whether or not that particular revenue stream would perform. Now, it gets complicated, extremely complicated, when you add 1,000 houses in a mortgage-backed security in a trust that's been sold off to however many different sorts of, through AAA, by the way, through all of the stopgaps, and to pension funds and all of that sort of thing, or municipalities or countries. And it just becomes a game of thievery through fees that people are putting together so fast that have absolutely no value of collateral, that in the end, the Federal Reserve, after the world blew up, because there was $600 trillion in 2009 of notional value in the derivatives market, 600 to 800 trillion, that ultimately they had to step in to provide this emergency liquidity with the full faith in the credit of the United States, that basically just generated digital assets out of thin air, based on no fucking collateral, which is exactly what goddamn Alameda was doing with FTX. Now, granted, Alameda and FTX was a tiny, tiny level in comparison to what I'm talking about. And even if you add up, Tether and Luna and Bitfinex and all of the other players that I've still yet to learn, but they still follow the same pattern. I don't know if they actually knew exactly what took place in 2008, or it was just a cultural thing where everybody started fancying themselves like, hey, you could actually create through your market makers a mythalized value for an asset that you can bet in collateralized trades to create all of this activity, which is what our stock market and our financial system has become. So if they want to talk about credibility, and now guys in the aftermath after they just blew up however many, I think 1 million, investors in FTX, and, the big ones are the ones that are probably going to get their money back and so forth. But the revelation is, while everybody is getting like bent out of shape for these cultural wars, the system is playing everybody. There is nowhere in the Constitution that it says that a cabal of financiers that work in the shadows using deception as the business model on a hierarchy of complicated, they always call it innovations, financial innovations. Fuck financial innovations. The more complicated it becomes, the more likely it is some sort of facade to be able to create the roulette wheel. And everybody in the past used to say, like it used to drive me nuts. In fact, this was drove me on my journey. Michael Moore would say things like, for example, the stock market Wall Street has become a casino. Okay, but who's playing the sport book? What are the rules on the blackjack table? What are the rules at the slots? I mean, what do we know about what to improve our chances and everything else? And if it's a casino, they've got to operate around a couple of laws, right? That's why they got their license. Yeah, that's not how Wall Street operates. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that a financial system led by criminals through the entire model are in the pole position to have the full faith and credit of the United States as their private fucking penny bank on a global fucking scale. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's what we're talking about. So everybody thinks, oh yeah, the system's rigged. The system's like this and that for the elite, and yeah, but they don't know who did what, when, and how, which makes them very susceptible to the culture wars. Hey, I got to blame it on the immigrants. I got to blame it on the blood-sucking pedophiliacs that are all over the place. Why? Because I guess I go to church and I got raped when I was a kid, something like that. I don't know. It's a strange psychological bent. But meanwhile, then the gamers want to play games, but do they not know what the hell's going on in terms of what real value is? Do they not understand economics? Well, it's all a game until you lose everything. And then it's not so funny, especially if it's the holidays and you're like stuck at TJ Maxx and you don't have money on your credit card because you're maxed out. And then suddenly you lose your job, which are real world complications. Then you get thrown out of your house, then you get divorced, then your kid goes to drugs and instead of become a superstar, and the American dream is dead. Why? Because a bunch of rich people can pay the government to basically write laws and to hide what they're doing behind the scenes. The United States is not a country of, by, and for the criminal racket that operates with deception to control the system. That is not the United States. It might be Brazil. It might be some, all the different countries in Central America. Fuck, it's Russia, whatever. Corruption is all over the world. It is not the United States. I've got to penetrate millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of you to understand that Patrick Lovell is listened to all the time by some of the most powerful, connected people in the world. They're listening to me because they know I have the evidence, and they're working with me, and we're moving forward on phase 2 and phase 3 of these things that I'm bringing to your attention. But unless we have millions of you understand what it is we're revealing to you, it's the emperor's new clothes. And I'd like to say on really bad acid. How can the largest criminal conspiracy in history that never ends, that affects every single thing you do, operate in plain sight and you not understand what's going on? Because it's not, you can't communicate this stuff in a TikTok video necessarily, even though we have been doing it. And I will give credence, I wanted to say this before I started and I forgot to. I love TikTok. I'm getting, because of my algorithms and what I watch, I'm seeing incredible music that I've always liked to listen to, which is connected to music that would be connected to the kind of music that I listen to, sports phenoms and really funny people and interesting people and great animals, and this whole potpourri of texture where I can literally lose an hour in one, sort of feed and not even know what happened because it's that entertaining. Some of it's kind of ridiculous, but there's so much great content all over, and I find myself like, look, if I'm not interested in what it is that I'm telling you, for example, and I'm not looking for it, I'm not going to find it. There's way too much information that's fun to watch and, quite frankly, escape from the realities of your world, and that has a place. Nobody wants to be completely consumed with this all the time. I can promise you from firsthand experience, it's not good for your health. It drives you a little bit frustrated, But I've got the answers that impact hundreds of millions of people, and I don't have hundreds of millions of followers. I'm a guy that is about liberty and justice for all. What I'm doing is to help you to defeat the corruption, because it's going to take you, and I've got the access to all the guys who could blow this stuff up inside out and arrest control of the government, if only we had critical mass to do it the right way. I'm not looking to create a revolution and a war, even though I think it's coming. Not by my hands, but by all of this other insanity that's happening. And those of you who think you're going to escape the hate and go somewhere else where it's safe so you don't have to deal with it, I wouldn't recommend that. Running away from hate doesn't solve the problem of hate. You've got to engage it. You've got to wrestle it. You've got to beat it. Because people who just default to hate, they hate their lives. It's easier to hate others when you hate yourself. That's not the answer. It's like Amsterdam. It's love and art. It's kindness. It's beauty. It's collaboration. It's the types of things that allow liberty and freedom and all of those things that can make us our best selves if we have a dynamic of letting us get there. You don't get there in a corrupt state that creates fascism. That's where we're headed if we don't wrest control of this situation. I am your gateway to making all that happen. That's all there is to it. I just made a promise to myself that I was going to find answers.